Hello everybody, it's good to be with you today and have this opportunity to share God in God's Word together. Our passage today is taken from the Gospel of John chapter 10, verses 1 to 10. So then hear the Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. I tell you the truth, Jesus says. The man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, I tell the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. You'll come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So, behind the lovely, rustic, pastoral images that this passage brings to mind, behind those wonderful bucolic images of sheep and hillsides and shepherds, do you remember hillsides? Do you remember when you could go and see them? Seems such a long time ago now, doesn't it? Well, anyway, behind all of that, you see, there is a serious and a stark message that is to be found in Jesus' words in the passage that we have been given today. And this is the message. Our lives are being contested over. We are being fought over. Ranged against each other, on the one side, fighting over us, are those powers that seek to steal and destroy. These are the illegitimate powers, powers that have no authority, powers that show no care or concern for us. These are simply counterfeit powers that seek to break in to get access to us, and that ultimately will secure only our destruction. Ultimately, what are these powers? Ultimately, they are the powers of death and the devil. But there, on the other side, protecting us, is the one who is the good shepherd. This is the true power, the one who has legitimate authority over those he oversees. He is the one who shows care over those that he leads, the one who is so intimate indeed with them that he names each and every one. This one is the one who, in dry and hostile and dangerous lands, leads those under his protection to fertile spaces, and he walks with confidence and purpose. He keeps each one safe. But more than this, for although care and safety are needed to be protected from all that might destroy us, his ultimate purpose is so much greater. I have come, he says, that they may have life and have it to the full. See, his mission is not just to protect. It is nothing less than to give life in all its glorious fullness. His work is to give abundant life, overflowing life, deep life, weighty life, joyful life, life that is more than survival, life that means thriving at every level of our human being. For this is what we have been made. You see, unaware of it as we may be. After all, what are we? We are sheep, and we have all of those important matters like eating grass to attend to, after all. So unaware of it as we may be, we are in the midst of a fight between the power that does not know us by name, does not care for us, and seeks only our harm, and the power of care, life, and even in the midst of this contest, peace. You are being contended over. Well, let's look a little bit closer at what prompts Jesus to make the set of statements that he makes in our passage today. Because, you see, they don't just come out of thin air. Our passage today is found in chapter 10 of John's Gospel. But if you have a Bible with you, you may want to cast your eyes up to the previous chapter. And actually, if you want to get a Bible, then feel free to just pause this video. Obviously now, this is the benefit of our situation. You can pause this video and go and get a Bible to take a look at this if you would like. Okay. Well, surprise, surprise. Chapter 10, you see, follows chapter 9 in John's Gospel. And what happens in chapter 9? In that chapter, we have the story of Jesus healing the man born blind. Jesus heals this man, and when his sight is recovered, the man is brought up before the religious leaders, the Pharisees. And as the chapter unfolds, the sight of the blind man whom Jesus healed becomes clearer and clearer. But at the same time, what we also see is the blindness of the Pharisees becomes darker and darker. What do they conclude about the one who has healed this man, who has liberated him from the affliction that has blighted his life since his birth? You see in verse 24, this is what they say about Jesus, this one. They say, he is a sinner. See, the Pharisees, they claim authority over this man. This blind man. They claim that they have cared for him. They care for him and for his good. But where ultimately does this end up? If you look there in the text, you'll see that eventually what happens is the Pharisees scorn this man. This is their conclusion. You were born entirely in sins. And then in verse 34 we read, they drove him out. The Greek word that's used here, they drove him out, is this one, ekibalon. They drove him out. The man is excluded from the synagogue. In their eyes, he is cut off, he is cast out, he is a heretic, an outcast, and he is to be shamed, excluded, and mocked, and ultimately he is handed over to death. But Jesus doesn't drive out those who come to him. Instead, as it says in verse 4 of our passage, he leads them out. He leads out those who come to him. What's the word that's used there? Well, it's the same Greek word again, ekibale. Jesus is the one who leads out those who come to him. This one, Jesus doesn't drive them out. Instead, he leads them by his voice. It's a voice that those under his care know. As Jesus says earlier in John's Gospel in chapter 6, the one who comes to him he will never cast away. So contrast Jesus' actions in chapter 9 with those of the Pharisees. Jesus, he encounters this man who is unable to work and is reduced to being a beggar, and rather than waiting for the man to come to him, he goes to him. And of course, this man cannot see him and so can only hear his voice. But Jesus heals the man and sends him off to wash. Then, if we fast forward through the story, when the man, once healed, has been cast out by the Pharisees, Jesus, once again at the end of that passage, he goes to him again. Again, he doesn't wait for the man to come to him. He seeks this man out. And there again, he makes himself available to this man who has been placed in even greater peril than he was in before by the actions of the Pharisees. Previously, he had the issue of his blindness to deal with, but now, because of what has happened by the Pharisees, he's now under the sentence of exclusion and has technically forfeited his life. Jesus, though, by making himself available to this man, he helps him come to faith and belief in him. And so life, a future hope, is made possible. So let's be clear what this story of the blind man is about. This man has been contended over. He's contended over by the Pharisees, whose care is shown to be a sham and whose path leads only to death. But Jesus, the shepherd, unlike the Pharisees, this one, the shepherd is known to. He makes himself available to. He is familiar with his sheep. Jesus, the shepherd, doesn't just preserve life. He creates it afresh in an unparalleled way. Jesus, the shepherd, offers paradise to those who have been condemned to death. What Jesus claims in our passage, though, is absolutely blunt. What Jesus claims in our passage is, though, that any power outside of his own, whatever it may be, whatever it claims, whatever it promises us, any power outside of him ultimately does not have our good at heart. Ultimately, it will lead in one direction, only to our destruction. In this instance, in the story that we've read, that power is that of the religious leaders, but it could be anything that seeks to claim us, that demands our devotion, anyone or anything that claims to offer us life outside of Christ. So the reality is, what Jesus is saying here is the implication is we cannot dabble with other things. We cannot dabble with things, whether they be apparently spiritual things, be they other religions or forms of New Age spirituality that promise different paths to enlightenment or truth or life. We can't dabble with other things, like maybe material things like success or money or power. You see, whatever any of these things promise for us, pursuing them will only place ourselves at greater risk. At the end of the day, all of those things will only stand in opposition to Christ. Now, you can dismiss what Jesus is saying here, if you want, as just nonsense or deranged. But please, whatever you do, don't try to downplay the stark, exclusive claim that Jesus makes in this passage. This is what he says: only and exclusively through Jesus is life available. Only and exclusively through Jesus is life available. There is no other place, no other way that we gain access to life except through him. This is what Jesus says in John 14:6. He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is the only point of access. There's no one else who has the right to exercise care over the sheep or the right to manage the flock outside of him. Jesus offers, though, not only to keep us safe from these non-powers that claim our allegiance and then claim our lives, he goes much further than that, though. Jesus' offer to us is to make us as alive as he is. Alive to God, brimming with all the life and energy of God. You see, Jesus doesn't just want to give you a pulse. He wants to synchronize your heart with the rhythm of God's own. Jesus came to give you life. This is what the blind man discovered. And as it says in the letter of 1 John, he who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. So as we come to him, as we cling to him, this is what we are given. We are given life. But really, we're not called to do too much in the light of all of this. You see, our role is simply to make sure that we recognise the shepherd's voice. Our role is to become attentive to him and able to distinguish his voice from all others. See, indeed, we may be caught in the midst of a conflict. We're told that we are. But our role is not to take part actively in that fight. We're not called in a way to pay overwhelming attention to that, to allow that fight to consume us. Instead, although we may be in a hostile land, our focus has to be upon the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd who promises to lead us always to good pasture. Maintain our focus on him, and he will ensure that our footing remains good wherever we are. One final thing. We've said that in this passage we recognise that we are contended over. Maybe it's worth asking, how does Jesus contend for you? How does Jesus contend for you? See, this passage contains what I've always thought of as one of the strangest of Jesus's sayings. He says in this passage, I am the gate. I am the gate. Well, what does that mean? In the Middle East of Jesus's time, then, as in fact still occurs today in the Middle East, at night time in the desert, sheep were herded into walled enclosures that backed up against a cliff face or the wall of a canyon. Such enclosures were surrounded by waist-high stone walls that were topped with thorny branches. This pen was for safety, so that the sheep would not become prey to the wild animals in the land. Only one small gap remained, however, the doorway, the one place for entrance and exit. At night, this was where the shepherd would lie down, acting as the gate. The shepherd would lie there to ensure that no sheep could be lost and to ensure that no predator could get in. I am that gate, Jesus says. See, that is where Jesus lies himself down. Jesus chooses to lie in that place, this place of risk in the midst of a landscape that is filled with threats. Jesus exposes himself. He chooses to occupy the hardest place. Jesus contends for us, you see, by making himself absolutely vulnerable. Vulnerable as he did on the cross. And he does this so that we might enjoy life in all its fullness. Thanks be to God.